So then coming to with all these parameters, what is the actual how we will actually measure the changes in climate or the effect of climatic changes. So it is generally measured in terms of watt per meter square, and it is called the effect is called the radiation forcing. So it is basically defined as the net change, that is the down minus up change in the irradiance at the tropopause after allowing the stratospheric temperature to adjust to radiative equilibrium, and with the surface and tropospheric temperature in the state of fixed unperturbed values. So it is because of the whenever there is an excess of, say for example, greenhouse gases or excess of aerosols in the atmosphere, then they will lead to this kind of changes, fluctuation in temperature because of the differential absorption and scattering that they produce in the atmosphere, and they are measured in terms of net radiation flux. So measure of this aerosol forcing or radiation forcing is in terms of watt per meter square. Now, again, depending upon the different kind of prevailing situations, these radiation forcing have been defined with different constraints, and they can be of different types as defined by the IPCC 2007 convention. So, depending upon where the atmospheric, whether we keep the atmospheric temperature for fixed everywhere, then it is instantaneous radiative forcing. Otherwise, different kind of radiation forcing are defined in the atmosphere, and depending upon their uses, there are different parameters which are involved with the different kind of radiation forcing estimates. Now, coming to the aerosols, these radiative forcings are then called the aerosol radiative forcing, and which is nothing but in this case, it is mainly the difference in net flux, solar flux, or particularly the shortwave flux if it is in the range of shortwave. So it is the net flux which is down minus up measured with and without aerosols at any level in the atmosphere. If we measure it at the surface, then it is called surface radiative forcing. If we do it at the top of the atmosphere, then it is top of the atmosphere radiative forcing. And if we want to calculate this change in net flux inside the atmosphere of the Earth, then it is called the atmospheric radiative forcing. So the global mean radiative forcing of the climate system, it has been now studied since a very long time, and particularly after the industrial revolution, because they are contributing more towards the climate change. So these radiative forcing effects of greenhouse gases are particularly well understood because we know to a very accurate level what is the net amount of these greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, methane, NO2, etc. in the atmosphere. So our level of understanding is also high, and their effect can be actually quantified in terms of watt per meter square in the climate uh, to a very accurate level. And these greenhouse gases are a very strong contributor, as you can say. They can affect up to say 2.5 watt per meter square uh, in the net change in radiation. But then there are other constituents like stratospheric ozone, sulfate, and aerosols, for example, for which the level of scientific understanding is still very low because the aerosols they are not mixed so well globally. They are very localized. Their lifetime is very small. They vary from a few days to a few weeks. And then they keep on generating, regenerating, and then their sinks are also available, which affect them on a smaller time scales. So because of that, and then there is in general a lack of accurate measurement, particularly of the aerosols. So because of these things, the our level of understanding for the aerosols in the atmosphere is still very low. Now, the coming to the different estimates. So the best estimate of global forcing, which is provided by IPCC so far, shows that the carbon dioxide is still the maximum contributor to the global radiative forcing, followed by the methane and other greenhouse gases. But and the aerosols, particularly, they are their net effect is to reduce heating. That is, they contribute towards global cooling. But then they do not compensate each other because of different level of scales at which these greenhouse gases and aerosols operate. So the aerosol radiative forcing effect of greenhouse is much wider compared to the effect of aerosols. But locally, the effect of aerosols can be very strong, and they can cause differential heating, which can produce different kind of effects in the atmosphere. Overall, the net anthropogenic radiative forcing, which is concerned, then still that radiative forcing is positive, and which means that the net effect of these two forces, you can say the greenhouse gases and the aerosols combined together, is still positive, and that indicates that there is a net effect of global warming, which this effect, the radiative effect, will overall have on the atmosphere. Now, again, coming to the problem, which is problem of finding the aerosol radiative forcing. The problem is that we have to find the change in irradiance, that is radiant flux per unit area of any electromagnetic radiation which is passing through the atmosphere. So again, we have to find it on the scales of different grids, horizontally as well as vertically, as we have seen in the case of the GCMs, the global circulation model, which also similarly divide the Earth into different grids, and then they study the changes in each and every grid and relate it with the other grid and pass on it to the next grid for overall effect to be simulated. So this is what the problem of finding aerosol radiative forcing is still there. But the question is how to find these, how to estimate this aerosol radiative forcing, which is sometimes called the direct aerosol radiative forcing, which is easier to estimate, or also called the direct aerosol radiative effect. So these, in order to find this, one of the ways is that you compute all the interactions over the entire thickness of the atmosphere uh, along the horizontal and vertical scales, which is actually impossible. So, in order to find the aerosol radiative forcing, what do? We find the radiative flux in the atmosphere with aerosols by two processes, either from satellite observation or from the model simulation using different kind of observed inputs, different kinds of aerosol parameters. And then the other method is to derive the fluxes without aerosol from model, because there is no other way we can actually measure the radiation flux at the surface without aerosols. So we have to use some of the model to generate that. And also by measuring the global flux using the pyranometers and then aerosol optical depth, and then finding their efficiency, and then estimating the aerosol direct radiative forcing. So in order to compute the aerosol radiative forcing, we need a model which is called usually the radiative transfer model. And one of the most commonly used radiative transfer model is the Santa Barbara Resort atmospheric radiative transfer model. Generally, we know it by the name SB-DART. So, this model has a very large number of input parameters. In fact, almost 75 input parameters, depending upon the which varies from the atmospheric profiles of weather parameter, trace gases, aerosols, cloud parameter, surface albedo, then geographical location, time, date, etc. So many parameters are involved as an input parameter. And then finally, the output can be obtained in terms of watt per meter square of flux uh, at different levels in the atmosphere, through which eventually the aerosol radiative forcing on a local scale, on a regional scale, or on a global scale can be obtained. Now, the important parameters that we need here are the aerosol optical depth, single scattering albedo, asymmetry parameters, aerosol size distribution, and surface albedo. These are the parameters that we have already discussed, and they are very important parameters which has to be obtained before putting it into the SB-DART model and finding the aerosol radiative forcing. Now, as we have discussed that it is not possible to calculate all the interactions. So, in order to even estimate the various parameters of aerosols, we need to have a model because there are so many aerosol parameters which directly cannot be measured, and those there are indirect method of estimating those parameters using a model which is called the opaque model or optical properties of aerosol at cloud. So these are the models developed by different scientists, and now it is widely used. Opaque model is developed by NASA, and here, depending upon the some of the measured parameters like aerosol optical depth, single scattering albedo, and so on, so forth, or the various aerosol parameters like black carbon, mineral dust, and etc. And also using the atmospheric height profiles which can of aerosols which can be measured. So using these parameters, first we use the opaque model to estimate the aerosol radiative parameters or radiative inputs, which are the single scattering albedo, asymmetry factors, etc. And once these parameters are obtained from opaque, then eventually they are put into the SB-DART model, which is the radiative transfer model, to eventually find the net flux at any level in the atmosphere, and thus the aerosol radiative forcing is estimated. But then it is very important that whatever results are obtained from the model for radiative forcing in terms of watt per meter square, they should be somehow measurable, and they should be somehow compared with the actual observation. And this is one of the example of that. That the SB-DART model here was it is the completely model based estimate of flux in terms of watt per meter square, and then similar observations were done using the pyranometers, which actual measures the radiation in terms of watt per meter square, and aerosols which were measured at surface by different instruments at different wavelength. And when they are normalized, aerosol optical depth are plotted with respect to the measured flux, and the here in this case the model flux, then we can say see that there is a extremely good correlation between these two results, and the observed forcing, which was of the order of 13 point minus 13.6 plus minus 1.4 watt per meter square. It is very close to the model estimate of 16.1 plus minus 1.2 watt per meter square. So there is only a difference of about 15 to 20% in actual model estimate and the observation, which is supposed to be very good as far as the atmospheric science studies are concern. So now there are various aerosol studies which have been done over Delhi and other parts of the country also. And here is a typical example of year-long observation of aerosol optical depth and how the direct aerosol radiative forcing estimates were done, uh, including the various optical properties like single scattering albedo and asymmetry parameter for the aerosols which are present in Delhi throughout the year. So this is the monthly estimate of aerosol radiative forcing, um, particularly with may be of interest to someone who is actually doing research in the area. But then the there are certain things that we can see that the surface direct aerosol radiative forcing, it can vary from minus 45 watt per meter square to 110 watt per meter square. That is the this is the amount of cooling. This is the amount of reduction in solar radiation in terms of watt per meter square over Delhi during different months. That is over Delhi during different months, because of aerosol alone, there is a reduction of about 45 to 110 watt per meter square of flux. Now, these flux, when they are reduced, then they are actually they help in what you call the differential heating, because in the atmosphere when where black carbon are present in more concentration, there can be heating. So at surface at some location there will be heating, at some location there will be cooling. So this kind of differential heating and cooling, particularly in the atmosphere, they affect the circulation on a large scale, and they are found to affect the monsoon circulation over the Indian region, and they are actually found to affect the rainfall also. So these are some of the examples of long-term aerosol optical depth studies over Delhi, particularly how different parameters are varying. So you can say here clearly that these aerosol optical depth, they are high during when there is a dust storm like May, June, July kind of thing. Then these aerosols are high because of the dry season and the dust which are coming from Rajasthan and other western region of the country and outside Arabian region also. So they increase the aerosols during this period. Then during winters again the aerosol increases, and in case of uh, and during the January months also, these aerosols are high in some of the wavelengths. But the important thing is that when we see these smaller wavelengths, then we can find that the maximum peak which is occurring during April, May, June, and then there is another peak which is found in October months, and this is mainly because of the biomass burning which is taking place in the region of Punjab, Haryana. So the husk, the burning which is taking place, what we call the rice husk, uh, which are burnt in the field, and then because of that, the aerosols in the atmosphere increases. So that is why, and then also there is some effect of because during these period there are a lot of burning of crackers which takes place in October. So you can see a signature of high load of aerosols in the atmosphere during this month of October. So these are the long-term studies which particularly over Delhi we have conducted, and we have seen that how they are affecting the overall climate in the long run. So if we take the long-term average, then in this particular decade, say 2002 to 2012, there is slight decrease in aerosol load, because there were not many events of dust storm taking place during this region. But overall, there is an increase in the aerosol load over the over Delhi and in the rest of the country, which is causing uh, say the effect of aerosol radiative forcing to increase over the period of time. So this concludes the second part of the talk, in which the we have discussed about the aerosols and various effects that it is having.